Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Notebook. I am Marc-Antoine Godin with Arpin Basu, live from California on this Friday, November 24th. How are you today, my buddy?
I'm good.
Yeah,
Enjoying life in California.
I
The
bet.
travel schedule is not fantastic, but the weather's been great. So I think the weather in Montreal has not been great, from what I
No,
hear.
no,
Yeah.
no.
So
It can't be California. There's no doubt about it.
yeah. So I can't complain. In Northern California, I like San Jose. It's fun. So
Yeah.
here I am.
But you mentioned the schedule, though. We're going to get to our main topic for today in a minute. But I wanted to ask you
Mhm.
right from the get go. The Canadiens played in Anaheim. They were, I don't know if they were still jet lagged, but they played in the evening. They were playing 3 games in 4. So
Mhm.
they had a day off yesterday. They were supposed to have a day off yesterday. They decided to practice.
They weren't
Then
supposed to have a day off. That was a scheduled practice that they decided to maintain.
right. How
Yeah.
surprising is that? That's my question because
It's
it's three
shocking.
games in 4 days.
And this what's shocking about it is that not only did they practice yesterday in San Jose, they practiced Monday in Brossard, flew to California, practiced Tuesday in Anaheim, and then on Wednesday had a morning skate. And here's what's particular about it is that Martin St. Louis said that the decision to have that morning skate was taken by the players.
Hmm.
They decided to have that morning skate. And because I think it was a reflection of sort of the critical nature of that period of the season in the players' eyes, where they saw how the season had been going. Because I think it was the first time the Canadiens held a full morning skate on the day after a full practice,
Yes.
and let's not kid ourselves, the practice in Brossard on Monday was extremely full. It was a difficult practice. The
Yeah.
practice in Anaheim on Tuesday was extremely full in a different way, was mentally full. There was a lot of teaching and tactical things going on at practice. And Marty gave them the choice, and the players decided that we should skate before the game against the Ducks.
It's a good
So it
sign.
shows
It's a good
it's a
sign.
good sign, and it just gives you a sense of the urgency that these players felt about the 4 losses in a row, where this could lead, uh, everything. So it gives you just a bit of insight into the mindset of the players and how they feel. Their season could wind up if they play well, and they didn't want to derail that in mid-November by allowing a 4-game losing streak to linger.
Right. And I think we saw the effects of that in Anaheim just by the way that they came out.
Yeah, for
They're
20 minutes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
clearly. I mean, it didn't last the whole game. That's true, but at least you could tell that their desire to start strong and change the
Yeah.
momentum. It was obvious, and they played
Yes.
one of their better periods of the season on that night. But then again, I come back to the fact that in terms of load management, in terms of just how teams organize their schedule, having a game in the evening, then a day that you could choose to use however way you see fit, and then you have two matinee games in a row. It would have been logical, or should I say, certainly like the common wisdom in hockey to have that
Hmm.
day off. So it speaks again to the fact that the Canadians think that they're really in the crunch time of the season and that they have many things to address
Yes.
in the way that they
Absolutely.
play.
Absolutely, they do. And it was, and another way of looking at it is that, yes, they have the back-to-back matinees, but then they have a day off, scheduled day off on Sunday. They
Mm,
have a practice on Monday before getting on a plane to go to Columbus, which might not be the most robust practice, let's say. So maybe they saw this as kind of the last opportunity to have a proper practice for the next, because remember that game in Columbus on Wednesday is the first of a back-to-back with travel. Uh, they're not really going to have an opportunity to practice for a while. So I think that kind of played into it as well. But for sure, the Canadians see this as being a critical part of the season to get back into the race, because whether you or I or anyone watching this podcast or anyone following this team believes that they can make the playoffs, this team believes they can make the playoffs. And so
Right.
they're going to try to nip this lull in the bud in order to allow themselves an opportunity to actually achieve that.
Okay, so on Thursday, it was Thanksgiving in the United States, and in Canada, it was just Thursday. But every year, there's this big hoopla in the NHL around the Thanksgiving date, which is pretty much the quarter mark pole in the season. And there's this Thanksgiving rule in hockey that around 80% of the teams that are in a playoff spot on that date will keep it, which means that
Mm-hmm.
there's of 16 teams that are in a playoff spot, either 12 or 13 of them will still hold their playoff spot at the end of the season. And if you're trailing at this time by more than 2 points, unless you played a lot less games than everybody, the odds are stacked against you. So
Mm-hmm.
the Canadiens are, they're technically 3 points behind the last wild card spot, which is currently held by the Detroit Red Wings. So today we thought that it would be we're going to use the excuse of the Thanksgiving day to do our quarter mark report on the Canadiens, see what worked, what did not in quirky fashion, if I should say. So let me ask you this to start: what should this team be grateful for?
I don't want to pick one of them, but basically they should be grateful for their goaltending. I mean, that's really, to me, is what this is all about. And
Mm-hmm.
this is the only reason the Canadians can reasonably consider themselves in the hunt for a playoff spot. Even as delusional as that might be, the only reason that's an actual thing that the Canadians believe is possible is because of the play of Sam Montembeault, Jake Allen at various points, and even Caden Primo, who's going to start against the Sharks on Friday. And just further to that, I just wanted to share with you guys. I had a chance to talk to Sam Montembeault yesterday about all the rumors swirling around him and just everything that's going on with him.
Yeah.
And you would think that the world is Sam Montembeault's oyster at this point. He's playing probably the best hockey of his career, had a phenomenal game in Anaheim, and was
Right.
as great as the Canadiens' first period was. The only reason they came out of Anaheim with a regulation win, their first in nearly a month, is because of Sam Montembeault. It was really the Ducks in the second period should have scored 6 goals, and they did not because Sam Montembeault prevented them from doing so. So really, he's on the top of the world. I mean, he's playing great. He's kind of proving what we saw from him last year, what we saw in the World Championships. He's in a contract year, but his reality is that these trade rumors are swirling around him, and he's in contract negotiations. There's a lot of uncertainty in his life. And so I asked him about it yesterday after practice, and he was like, "Yeah, I've seen the rumors. It's hard to kind of, you're on social media, you see them go by. It's hard not to notice it. And plus, all my friends see it. So if I go to like Facebook, um, then then even then, I don't have a respite because they're reposting things on Facebook and they're sending stuff out. So I see it." But he said, I was like, "So what do you do when you see it?" He's like, "Well, I keep scrolling and I'll look at the comments." And for anyone listening out there, especially for people like myself, for you, this is my strategy: is
Don't
keep
read the
scrolling
comments.
and don't read the comments. So good for Sam Montembeault for doing that. But that's how he's approaching it. But his
Yeah.
his stance is kind of like, I want to play for the Canes as long as I possibly can. I'm super happy here. I want to sign a long-term contract. I want to be. If I could retire for the if I could retire with the Canadiens, that would make me the most happy. Is what he said.
Wow.
So in this context, you have two kind of sides of Sam Montembeault. He's like been the savior and he's playing amazing. And on the other side of it, he has this massive uncertainty surrounding his career and in the most pivotal season of his career, where he could go UFA at the end of the year. He could be traded. Who knows what's going to happen? But it's so to me, he is, and Jake Allen and Caden Primo, the goaltending in general, but really him is what the Canadiens should be most grateful for. But when you're grateful for something, you should probably reward it. But I don't think it's that simple for the Canadiens, because I'm not sure to what extent they want to give the security that Sam Montembeault seeks. And as we've mentioned in previous episodes, finding a happy fit between what the Canadiens feel he's worth for how many years and what Sam feels he's worth for how many years is probably going to be a difficult fit.
Yeah, yeah. When it comes to what I think the Canadiens should be grateful of, I'll go with the patience of the fans, and I'll tell you why. Back on draft,
are the fans being patient?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think that they're showing more patience than I thought they would, because on draft day, when the Canadiens drafted David Reinbacher, the backlash was so strong, so visceral, and there was so much venom spewed in the Canadiens' direction that I thought, oh, the honeymoon's over. Now they're losing the benefit of the doubt in the way that they're communicating with the fans, and now everything's going to be harder, and all the clemency that they got from the fans in the previous season, it's not going to be there anymore. There's less patience than last year, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, I think that there's still a healthy amount, more than I thought there would be, because every time that you bring up the fact that this team is on a losing skid, or they're not doing enough of this, not doing enough of that, well, the reaction is always, what do you expect? They're a rebuilding team. So, because I read the comments. I read the comments. So
yeah, no, I've always told you shouldn't, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, it's when people bother to write to you at some point, it's good to take the pulse, and the pulse that I get is that there's still quite a bit of patience among the fan base, and I think the Canadiens should be grateful for that, because they're selling something that is going to get increasingly difficult to sell, and in that sense, they still have some interesting leeway to work with.
Do you really feel that though? I mean, honestly, I look at a lot of fan comments. I do read comments, and so I mean, I look at a lot of them, and I see a lot of impatience with Juraj Slafkovsky. I see a lot of impatience with David Reinbacher. I see a lot of impatience with just some of the decisions the Canadiens have made and not allowing them to play out. I think that there's a strong faction of the fan base that is still extremely frustrated that the Canadiens did not draft Matvei Michkov.
Yeah.
There's a lot of and that's fair. That's fine. You can disagree with that, and that's totally and perhaps those fans will be right. I'm not discounting those people's rights to their opinion and whether that opinion is false. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that I don't see that much patience in those two picks. And I think that's extended to some other decisions that the Canadiens have made that are just being sort of piggybacked on the frustration over those two picks. And so,
yeah,
it's so I do think there is a strong faction of the Canadiens fan base that is being patient and is willing to let things play out a little bit. But I think there's another strong faction of the Canadiens fan base that is quickly becoming disillusioned with the new management group based on two draft picks, largely. That is becoming a bit of there's a bit of a dichotomy there. There's two sides to this, to the viewpoint of how the Canadiens are building for the future. And I think there's a lot of discouragement out there that's palpable and readable online for sure.
Yeah, but I agree. But regarding Reinbacher, I mean, all the discontent regarding that, I mean, it's isolated. I don't put any weight on that anyway because the kid's not even playing in the NHL. Slavkovsky's a whole different matter, just in terms of second guessing his draft, second guessing the way that he's being handled. So that's an issue in itself. But I think that the lack of patience or the criticism towards Slavkovsky doesn't extend to the whole team in general in terms of what the expectations are for this team this year, its place in the standings and whatnot. So that's where I make the separation between the two. People can complain all they want about Runbacker. Honestly, until he sets foot in North America, I don't. I give no validity to their judgment.
That's fine, but it's a factor in the overall patience of the fan base, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because
but
they're seeing a guy
game to game, it doesn't factor in though.
Well, somewhat. I mean, game to game, it depends on which league you're talking about. Game to game in Sochi, they see Matvei Michkov putting up a point a game in Sochi, and it contributes to it. So it's, I think there is a, there is a certain amount of patience among a strong group of the fan base, and honestly, love to hear from you guys where you feel about this. But I feel, and maybe these are just the most vocal parts of the fan base that I'm reading, but I don't see all that much patience.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of impatience in the sense that there's a lot of impatience fueled by disagreement. Like, we disagreed with the decision to draft Slav. We want Shane Wright, and all of a sudden it's Logan Cooley that we actually wanted. And in David Reinbacher's case, it's clear that there's a strong part of the fan base that wanted them to draft Matvei Michkov. That's not going to play out for another 2.5 years before we see what he actually can do in the NHL. But in any case, I think those disagreements have resulted in a heightened sense of impatience among the fan base, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I got a ton of those little questions to go through. So it's if at that rate, man, you're gonna miss the game against the Sharks. So let's keep going. Okay, what is the one thing that you could not have seen coming before the season?
One thing I couldn't see coming before the season was Yoel Armia being in Laval. Mm-hmm. The fact that Yoel Armia has been in Laval twice, I definitely did not see that coming. And so that was a stunner to me. It's a stunner to me that the Canadiens consider, and with all due respect to him, and I think he's played actually quite well, but that Michael Pezzetta is considered a more valuable piece of the active lineup than Yoel Armia. As for everything that you could say against Yoel Armia, a lot of which is valid, he's a bona fide NHL player who can be very effective in certain roles, definitely in a fourth line role as a penalty killer. So to see him back in Laval after being, in my eyes, pretty effective when he came back from Laval, I did not see that coming, for sure. 100%.
That's a good one. I had not thought of that one. For me, that having three goalies, the three goalie rotation is something that I had not seen coming. It's funny because on the one hand, I wrote about it like in September.
Before anyone else did.
Before anyone, but
long before.
I know, but that was more pertaining to the possibility that they have to start the season with Casey DeSmith.
Yes.
So I could definitely see that happen with Casey DeSmith, but they found a solution to that little conundrum, and yet they decided to stick with three goalies. At the end of training camp, with Caden Primo sticking around in Montreal. And much to my surprise, too, they were not the only team to do so. It seems to be, I won't call it a trend, but the more that you have tandems in the league, the more value there is put in your number 2 goalie, even in your number 3 goalie. So because your number 1 goalie, you accept the fact that he's not as dominant as he was before. So you need to have more depth. You need to have, it becomes more of a weakling sort of strategy in the way that you deal with your goalies. So
Mhm.
there were, at some point, I think there was 5 teams that had 3 goalies on their roster.
It's like
And
for a day, I think.
no, okay. But
But
so
yeah,
I did.
there were 5 seasons that there were 5 teams that opened the season with
That's
3
right.
goalies.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I had not seen it coming before the season. I definitely did not expect that it would last this long.
Mhm.
Uh, but now, and I cannot risk myself into saying how long it's going to take because before it gets resolved. And I will put it also an honorable mention to Jaden Struble playing his first NHL game before Christmas, because it needed three defensemen, 3 regular defensemen to be injured, and it needed him to be ahead of Matthias Norlinder and William Trudeau in the depth chart, based simply on his play since the beginning of the season in Laval. In
Yeah.
order for him to earn that call up and play so early in the year, that's something that I really did not see coming.
Yeah, and I think the Struble call up had something to do with the whole soft comment in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't. It's no coincidence that they brought up someone who plays the game hard, and
Yeah,
so
especially
I
with
think
Jack
that had
out
something to
of
do
the
with it.
lineup.
And honestly, Jaden Struble's debut in Anaheim was excellent. Played a mistake-free game, played within himself, was
Yep.
not overtaken by the moment. His family was in the stands. It was a big deal. He was nervous. He didn't show it at all. I thought he handled himself extremely well in a game that was scrambly. Let's be honest. Like there are 10 guys on the Canadiens that I could name who handled that game worse than Jaden Struble did. And so
Fully agree.
it's, yeah, so kudos to him. Showed sort of the mental fortitude to handle difficult situations, um, and played a really smart hockey game.
Mm-hmm.
And so good on him. And let's see where that goes. But he remains ahead of Matthias Norlinder on the depth chart. When I asked Marty, um, if he just needed a practice with Norlinder before putting him in, Marty's answer was, well, it's Thanksgiving. We're on the West Coast. We need an extra body. So it didn't sound like Marty St. Louis is all that eager to get Matthias Norlinder in the lineup. We'll see what happens later today if that actually happens. But it sounded to me like Struble was the guy. It wasn't
Yeah.
just a matter of waiting or whatever. So, um, and quite honest, before the game, I mentioned I was like, oh, I don't think we're going to see Struble and Lindstrom on the ice together too often, especially on the road. It seemed like a risky play, but they were on the ice often. They were on the ice together quite often,
Yeah.
and really held their own. And so I think Lindstrom's been up and down since he's been up, but is showing himself to be a serviceable replacement defenseman. I mean, this is a guy and the fact that they felt confident enough to play a guy making his NHL debut with Lindstrom is a bit of a feather in the cap for Lindstrom too. Like I really thought that they were just going to rotate both of those guys in with the top 2 pairs. So on occasion, Lindstrom would sub in for Kovacevic, who had an awful night in Anaheim, like just absolutely horrendous night in
Yeah.
Anaheim. So I thought they would rotate him in with for Kovacevic, maybe throw Struble in where they could. He's obviously not going to take Gooley or Matheson's place, but no, they were a pairing. They played a regular shift until late in the third period, and did quite well. So good for Jaden Struble. Let's see if he can build on this. I think it's a pretty encouraging sign to have, especially with Jacki out, a guy who has a physical edge to his game and puts defense first.
There you go. Amen to that. All right. Let's move on to who's your MVP of the first quarter of the season?
Uh, it's tough because my MVP would have been, as of like a week ago, Sean Monahan.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's proceeded to have like uh, probably his two worst games in a Canadiens uniform over the last couple of games. So,
Yeah, but the
Boston,
decline had started before that, though.
the
He
decline
has.
had started, but I mean, it's really cratered at this point. And he took the day off of practice yesterday in San Jose. So he's probably playing through something, which is another red flag when it comes to him. But I'm going to stick with him because for the vast majority of this quarter of the season, obviously the 20th game is later today, but for the first quarter of the season, the most consistent line and the one line and that had the biggest influence on the way Marty set up his lines up until a few games ago was the line of Sean Monahan, Tanner Pearson, and Brendan Gallagher. And with Monahan's role on the penalty kill, Monahan's role on the power play, and the fact that that line was the one line Marty refused to touch for the longest time, to this point, I still feel comfortable saying that Sean Monahan was the MVP of the first quarter of the season. But with the way things are trending now, that answer risks being different over the second quarter. But it still was a remarkable run for Monahan over the first 17 games of the season, let's say maybe 16,
Yeah.
where he, in my eyes, was, with no hyperbole, the most important forward the Canadiens had.
Well, it's good. It remains a decent choice. Any goalie could. I mean, Samuel Montembeault could have been a good pick too, but he hasn't played enough games, I guess, to qualify. So I will go with Caden Gooley
Yeah,
because
it's fair.
yeah. So he has not played as much as Mike Matheson, but the level of stability and consistency that he's shown on the blue line. It was even greater than Matheson. Matheson has had some very, very difficult games. Gooley has had maybe
Yeah.
one or two that were like distinctively, like out of character. But for the most part,
And even
his
those one or two weren't that bad.
no, well, there was, it was maybe like a lack of concentration or a bit lack of discipline that creeped into his game once in a while. But I mean, he's so effective. He can be dominant in all three zones. And when we think of the Canadiens of the future and how the youngsters will eventually take over, and to me, is the Caden Gooley is the epitome of how things can be positive and be cause for hope. I think
So let
he's
me
everything that's going right when we talk about progression and development. For him, everything's going right. So
so
he's a treat to watch.
let's just point out that neither you nor I mentioned either Nick Suzuki or Cole Caulfield as the
Yeah.
MVP of the team. And I think that's a big area of concern for this team is that while neither of them, I think, have played terrible, Suzuki obviously had a bit of a lull, but even when he's come out of that lull, has not been spectacular. He's been adequate, I'd say, as a
Mm-hmm.
first line center. Um, and Cole Caulfield's obviously not scoring at the same rate that he normally does. So I think that's kind of telling that neither you nor I thought to bring up one of them as the team's MVP, and that's going to have to change for the future of this franchise. They can't have a quarter of the season go by and have neither of two people who follow this team extremely closely choose one of Suzuki or Caulfield as the MVP of the team. That has to change because these are two crucial pieces to what the Canadiens are trying to build here. They are
Yeah.
the two players with the longest term contract. There's been a major financial commitment made to both of them. And so far, while they haven't been awful, they
It's
are
been
not the best
okay.
players on the team. They're not
It's
the
been
best players
okay.
on the team.
No.
It's that simple. And so over the second quarter, the Canadiens need to see something from both of these guys in a big way. More
Yeah.
so Caulfield than Suzuki, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, but I'll come back to that later. I want to ask you about who's the most improved player so far this year.
Well, he's your MVP. It's Gooley to me.
Yeah,
Gooley's, and I don't even know if that's fair because frankly, I think he's playing very similar to how he played last season, but it is it's at another level. The poise and the composure in his game is you watch him. The way I judge Gooley is that when he makes a mistake, it stands out because he never makes them. And you're like, that's the baseline for a player who's in his second season
yeah,
as a defenseman playing in a top four role. And the other night in Anaheim, I mean, Kovacevic was having just an awful time of it, right? And so the contrast between Kovacevic at 26 is also in his second NHL season. Let's not overstate that, or understate that. But you compare the way that Kovacevic's night was going to Gooley's, you're like, oh, it's a good thing he's got like a veteran presence next to him. But no, he doesn't. It's Caden Gooley, his second year. So I think his composure, his poise, his leadership, a lot of things make me think that Caden Gooley is the most improved player on this team.
yeah. I'll go. I'll go with Justin Barron because
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah, because Justin Barron. I know he keeps saying that he was happy with his camp. I thought that his training camp was just okay. It was better than last year, but it was still just okay. He started off the season as this Canadian seventh defenseman, and obviously, David Saval's injury changed his fate for the better to a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent because he stepped into a role that he acclimatized with gradually over games. And honestly, he started the season as a 7D, and now, I mean, you look at his ice time, he's playing 22 minutes, 20, 21. It's pretty good. He's become a
Yeah.
top 40 and a pretty, not necessarily mistake free, but a more stable Justin Barron than what we had seen previously, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
encouraging because uh, I mean we've talked about him in previous episodes of the Notebook, but to me this is a guy who we tend to forget his age. We picture because he was traded for Archery Lekanen, and he was a first round pick in in 2020. He just turned 22 years old, but people will think that 20 by the age 22 years old you're supposed to be who you are, and if you're not there yet, you'll never get there. Well, he's still developing, and I feel like he's finally found some momentum for himself. And it's not just from last year to this year, like you can say for Gooley. It's really from game 1 to game 19.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
from
it's
day one of training camp to game
that's
19.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't disagree. And I think he's been really solid. Honestly, like and I didn't think it would be a good fit with Mike Matheson, but it has been. And I
Mhm.
think, I think actually, I think since Barron's been with Matheson's improved. So, don't disagree at all.
Yeah.
Um, let's jump ahead a little bit. And we had a whole list here, but as is normally the case, we've gone too long on many of them. So let's jump to the most worrisome trend
Yeah.
over the first quarter of the season.
Okay.
What's that to you?
Well, to me, it's a standings thing. The fact that their record is not better than last year. Before the beginning of the season, the word was progression. It had to be, you had to see progression, whether it's a collective progression or individual progression, but this team had to take a step forward. And let's not forget
Hmm.
that last year after 19 games, the team was 9-9-1. So they were playing for 500. This year they're 8-9-2, pretty much the same. But back then, last year at the same time, you had Mike Matheson, who had played only 2 games. Joel Edmondson had missed a dozen. Yoel Armia had been hurt. Even Slavkovsky had missed like 3 games. So it's not as though they were completely healthy, and this year they've been the victims of a few injuries here and there. Um,
Yeah.
and you got to wonder, which, if it's not the overall, the result based type of progression, well, then if you turn to the individual progression, well, which young players have taken really a step forward in their progression? Goalie, no doubt about it. We just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned Barron. There's Montembeault also. I would say that New Hook seems to have taken a step compared to his Colorado days, but that's where Suzuki entered the conversation. Where Cole Caulfield, with the fact that he's regressed in his production, specifically his 5-on-5 goal production,
Mm-hmm.
you can't say that he's progressed in the early on in the season. Slav, the progression's been incremental. Same for Harris, and there's other guys, So yeah, I mean it's been only a few games, but I don't think that HP has set the world on fire either, or even continued with the momentum of last year. So when you look at the young players on the team, uh, there's not a whole lot of them that have really taken a positive step. So last year we kept saying, well, had it not been for all those injuries, they probably would not have been a bottom 10 team. And right now, well, they're a bit banged up. They're like something like 20 to around 23rd in overall. So if this team doesn't collapse because of injuries and they keep hovering around 500 until the end of the season, and if you don't see significant improvement from their key young players later on in the year, well, I don't see how management will look at this year and say, you know what, mission accomplished. We did what we set out to do this year. So when we talk about the biggest worrisome trend, to me, that's that. It's the lack of obvious, significant progression, either on the collective side or the individual side.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's I think there's regression coming to that in the sense that I don't think Cole Caulfield's going to score one even straight goal all year. I don't think Nick Suzuki is going to not produce to the extent that he has him so far, even though I think he's on a 4 game point streak, if I'm not mistaken, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe 3 games at this point. No, I think there is some correction coming offensively from some of the younger players.
Yeah.
But to me, defensively, the worrisome trend is leaking chances off the rush. I mean, the other day, Megan Chaika from Athletes put out this chart that showed which teams give up the most chances off the rush per 60 minutes and which teams give off the most chances off the cycle per 60 minutes. The Canadiens were right in the middle in terms of giving up chances off the cycle, but were far and away the leader in giving up chances off the rush.
More
And
than
it's more than anyone.
wow. Okay.
No one more than Edmonton, more than I think Chicago was next closest, and
Mm.
Chicago was so far to the right because they give up chances in both. So it was hard to like really measure it, but the Canes were above Chicago
Right.
in terms of giving up chances off the rush. So I think when you're trying to build a team and you're trying to develop through competitiveness and winning, as the Canadiens claim they were this season, the one way to do that and the one way to mitigate against Josh Anderson not scoring 19 games in, Cole Caulfield not scoring as much as he usually does, Nick Suzuki taking some time to get going. The one way you mitigate against that is to play solid defensively, and the Canes haven't done that. I mean, they remain a very leaky, undisciplined defensive team. To be honest, they're the most penalized team in the league. Their penalty kill has shown a lot of leaks of late. I think they only took one penalty against Anaheim, and it was Slavkovsky just having his arm in the wrong place. Credit to Mason McTavish for hooking that arm and falling down, but it only took him 5 seconds to convert off the ensuing faceoff. It's not. So there's a lot of defensive issues, I think, on this team, and it's something that I feel. I don't want to say that that Martin St. Louis doesn't want to address because his focus on the forecheck is essentially defensive focus.
Yeah.
But they've uh, they got a lot of issues in their own end, and it's something that structurally you would like to see the coaching staff improve because they had those issues last season. And again, to go back to what your answer was on this, the progression there has not been good. So that's my
Well, those
answer.
all those chances off the rush. You look at the game in Anaheim, the number of odd man rushes that they gave up. I mean, no, it's no surprise that they want
There
to
was
practice
probably,
as much as possible.
I think there were
So,
7 in the second
yeah,
period alone.
yeah,
And,
that was
and,
nuts.
and it's funny, after the second, I crossed paths with Eric Raymond, and I was like, yeah, your guy's putting up a pretty good one, eh? It's referring to Sam Montembeault.
Hmm.
Um, he's like, yeah, it's too bad. He was, he was right there he mentioned like just kind of the minor mistakes that were made on the 2 goals. I was like, Eric, like, how many odd man rushes has he faced? He's allowed 2 goals.
Yeah,
They've given up like 10 odd man rushes in 2 periods. He was like, yeah, that's not my department. It's like, so,
no,
so it was a polite way. It was kind of a polite way to say that, yes, you're right. I would have liked to have seen this, this, and this on the goals that he allowed, but that's a goalie coach's
no
job,
comment,
Like,
no comment.
yeah, it was
Otherwise, yeah,
basically a no comment, and
yeah.
and and basically, and focusing on the corrections to be made as opposed to all the good things that Montembeault did, and that was before he absolutely robbed. I think it was Frank Vetrano at the end,
Oh man,
or in
what
the
a glove
third period
save!
with that glove save, and so
Damn. Yeah.
the Canadiens' defensive play has been subpar, to be polite, and it's something that they can't allow to continue if they want to actually fulfill the mandate that they gave themselves of being a competitive team who's still trying to develop and still trying to progress.
Well, when we look at their that decor, even first day of the season, you looked at the list of defensemen. We sort of expected that it would be a weak spot for the Canadiens this year. Now they're down 3 regular defensemen that are injured. I think that there's a lot of responsibility that has to shift, or it should have been like that from the get go. But Martin Saint Louis mentions a lot the fact that they defend as a 5-man unit. I think that
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more that's being expected out of the forwards to really apply either good forecheck deep in the zone or good back pressure when the rush is going the other way. But the group of forwards have to be a lot more active than they've been because those defensemen, I mean, there's they're bound to be eaten alive otherwise, and it's fantastic that the the goalies, whether it's Montembeault, Allen, or Primo, have been playing that way. But at some point, there's a chance that there might be a regression going the other way when it comes to the goaltending too.
No,
It's
100%,
right.
100%,
So,
and they can't rely on the goaltending to bail them out all the time. And I just feel like
but we said
this
that
is
after the first month of the season, and now after 2 months, it's
that's
the
what I'm
same
talking about.
reality.
Well, that's why it's a worrisome trend. That's
Yeah,
that's what I'm talking about.
that's it.
So it's all right. So the next one, um, who's been most put to the test so far?
Yeah, I would go with Jonathan Kovacevic. Honestly,
Yeah.
that guy, you're really stretching it. You know, the fact that he's playing, as much as he has at the NHL level so far. I mean, yes, it's only his second full season in the league, but he's been put in a situation that is new to him. He doesn't exactly have either the profile or the skills to be playing such an important role. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The last couple of games, you're mentioning how it's been difficult for Monahan in Boston, and then after that in Anaheim. Well, same could be said about Kovacevic.
Mhm.
And it's at first I thought that he'd be a third pairing, borderline 7th D. The fact that he can play on both sides, he's got a lot going for him. But he's been asked to do a lot, and I think that he's reached his limit. So on certain nights, it's really you have to put your finger on the pulse and see, okay, tonight does he have it the way that we want it, or do we have to scale it back a little bit? So there's a read to be done with Kovacevic, because you can see in the current situation, with all that's being asked, that there's going to be a lot of inconsistency in his play.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and yeah, I think that's a great pick. And actually, I'm going to go back to my MVP kit pick because I think Sean Monahan is being asked to do a bit too much, and I think it's starting to show itself now. And I think it's tempting. It's so tempting as a coach when you see Sean Monahan, everything he does, and everything that he brings to the team, and all the roles that he can fill, and how responsible he is. Listen, he did not have yet. I'm going to flat out say he had a bad game in Anaheim. However, when the Canadiens needed to protect that lead at the end of the game, he played the final 2 minutes of the game,
Mm-hmm.
and had another shift within the last 5 minutes. So played about 3.5 of the final 5 minutes of that game. This is something like Martin St. Louis. He has become his security blanket, and I wonder the extent to which they're going to kill his trade value because they're playing him too much. Like he's playing over 20 minutes a night, or roughly 20 minutes a night, both special teams. Although I think his work on the PK has been dialed back a little bit, but he's been Mr. Everything for this team, and they're going to have to dial it back. He's being asked to do too much, and he's been great.
Yeah.
But right now we're seeing some signs of wear and tear. Maybe not injury wise, even though missing practice yesterday in San Jose is maybe the first sign of concern with him. But there's being too much asked of him. I think his sweet spot would be 15 to 17 minutes, which is still a robust number in terms of ice time. But I think we're starting to see from his performance and from the fact he had to sit out practice yesterday that maybe he's being leaned on a little too hard, and
Yeah.
that for the well-being of the franchise and the well-being of the Canadiens, they need to optimize that guy as much as they can for as long as they can to goose his trade value and get as much as they can for him prior to the deadline. And the way things are trending over the last little while, there's an adjustment that needs to be made, and maybe it's the fact that his minutes need to be dialed back. So that's what I would go with.
Because he's a top six talent, but he needs to be managed as a third line center.
Yeah, and it's
in
fine.
terms of 15 to 17 minutes, because he'll do everything well, but at some point, if you squeeze the fruit too much, there won't be any juice.
So. Exactly, and that's the risk that you run when a guy like, I think we're seeing it from Tanner Pearson too, to some extent, where he's not as effective as he was early in the season, but his role is not quite as significant as Monahan's is. But I think these are two guys that the Canadiens would love to trade before the deadline.
Yeah,
let's put them in a position to optimally perform so that there's sufficient trade entrance a long time from now. They got to go another 3 months minimum where these guys are being effective for some sort of auction situation to develop with them. And less so with Pearson, but definitely with Monahan, it's something that has to be monitored.
I don't know if it's done as closely with Adam Douglas as it was with Pierre Allard, but we're referring to the Canadian specialist of sports performance and and conditioning too. But Pierre Allard, back in the day, he used to use all the data that they had with the catapult wearables. And basically, with all the amount of data that he had,
they don't wear them anymore.
Huh? No,
they don't wear them anymore.
So, but he used to collect that in order to manage how much to identify the ideal workload for each player, both in
Mm-hmm.
practice and during games. And the result of it was that the Canadiens would play. It might have been a byproduct of the fact that they didn't have like Austin Matthews or a superstar on their team, but their top six guys would play really less than almost any group of forwards in the league. And it would be a very interesting case study if Pierre Allard was still here to hand him Sean Monahan and say, okay, what would be the ideal ice time based on the data, based on
Right.
with the
Well,
information that you get from him?
I think Adam Douglas says those things, and I think Adam Douglas actually has a coach who listens to him, as opposed to Pierre Lalande, who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like is I think there's a more progressive way of viewing things with the Canadiens. I think that's probably the reason why Sean Monahan wasn't at practice yesterday. Uh, but um, but Adam Douglas does listen. Whenever you're on the road, you see Adam Douglas in real time during practice, inputting data. Although I think his techniques have changed from last season. There was a lot more of that last season, so maybe we'll have to dig into that.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one I want to get in our little awards thing because I thought this was funny when you came up with it. But who this season is more miserable, Connor McDavid or Josh Anderson?
Yeah.
Which I thought was a nice cheeky question and very appropriate today. So I'm going to let you answer first, and then I will go next. But I think we're going to have the same answer, but I think I have a bit more context than you do on this one with Anderson.
You cannot go that many games without scoring a goal and look so sad and miserable than Josh Anderson right now, because Connor McDavid, I mean, he's the premium talent in the world, and he has the opportunity on any given day to change the fortunes of his team, at least on one side of the ice. Whereas Josh Anderson, I mean, I could understand if he saw no end in sight to this spiral. And I remember he said at some point, like a couple of weeks ago, he says, I don't know what I've done wrong to the man up there, or what the man
I
up
don't know
there
what the
has
guy. I
against
don't
me.
know what the guy up there has against me. Yes, exactly. That's what he
Exactly.
said. Yeah.
So if that was the case like 10 days or 2 weeks ago, well, there's like a godly wrath that's still full on against Josh Anderson. He'll come out of it at some point, and I keep saying that I recognize the fact that, man, he must be doing some good things, because all those chances he misses in the slot, he has them because he's there. Because for all that Martin Saint Louis talks about not necessarily being always fast, but being there at the right time, well, Josh Anderson is there at the right time, but he misses the net constantly. It's gotten into his head. I really hope that he comes out of it the ASAP, because he's a good player. And when I read the comments and I see, anyway, Josh Anderson is not a good player, shut up. He's a good player. But it's one spectacular funk he's in right now.
Well, that's all well and good, but I mean, really, the most miserable of the two is Connor McDavid. I mean, let's be honest. In terms of comparison of expectations to actual results, there's no comparison. I mean, Connor McDavid is the most miserable NHL player in the league. There's no doubt about it. Josh Anderson is not in a good place, um, but there's no comparison to a guy who was expecting to win a Conn Smythe Trophy and a Stanley Cup and all of a sudden be at the bottom of the league standings. But
Fair
having said
point.
that, Josh
Fair point.
Anderson, Josh Anderson yesterday in San Jose, half hour before practice begins, with the goalies, comes out, and there's always two guys who come out to shoot on the goalies. And at first I was like, oh, isn't that nice? Josh Anderson's coming out to shoot on the goalie. It's always Jesse Alonen, always, and some other guy. This time I thought the other guy was Josh Anderson. I was like, oh, okay, he's going to work on his shot on the goalies. Good for him. No, he went to the other end of the ice while the goalies did their workout before the practice. Yuri Slavkovsky eventually came out to shoot on the goalies. Josh Anderson was by himself, opposite end of the ice, shooting on pucks on net. Eventually Adam Nicholas comes out, tries to pump him up, do what Adam Nicholas does, high energy, rah, rah, blah, blah, blah. But started working on things, spent a half hour shooting. And, you know, in the same breath, almost, but it wasn't really. It was in two separate answers. But on one hand, Josh Anderson was asked, where's your mental state at? Oh, I think I'm actually in a pretty good place mentally. Later was asked, oh, are you able to park it and keep this stuff at the rink when you go home? Well, no. When we lose,
No.
and I could have had an impact on the game and I didn't, that's the kind of stuff I think about. So, listen, the only reason Josh Anderson is not the answer to this question is only because the level of misery of Connor McDavid is on such an exponentially greater level. But if Connor McDavid didn't exist, Josh Anderson's misery would be way up there. So I don't disagree with what you said about him. It's just that we have to keep things in perspective. Connor McDavid thought he'd be raising a Stanley Cup at the end of the season. Right now, it's looking like he's not going to make the playoffs. So it is relative.
Every time on TV when they cut to him and the bench looking in the horizon, or like his eyes are completely dead, and it's like, what the hell is this mess?
Yes, and I don't blame him. And the misery is real. And I think in Josh's case, it is also real, and he's struggling with it. But it's a tough one. All right, so we had a listener, because it's Friday, and we called it Prospect Friday, and we had a listener who decided that it should be called Future Friday, which I gotta say has a better ring to it.
Yeah.
So I think we should get to Future Friday here.
I'm all for alliterations. So There you go.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this week, actually, our Future Friday will be not on one but on two guys, and we're gonna go to Russia, and because there are two picks that the Canadiens made in the last draft. They drafted defenseman Bogdan Konyushkov, and also they also drafted a goalie, Yevgeni Volokhin, and Volokhin was a 5th-round pick, and both of these guys really stand out so far in their respective role. Konyushkov, has started. He was drafted as a double overager by Montreal.
Right.
And he plays for Torpedo, which is the team of coached by Igor Larionov. He's basically their number one defenseman.
Oh, that is. It's not Nizhny Novgorod.
No. Well, Torpedo is actually. Hold on a second. But is it? No, Nizhny Novgorod is a different. Yeah. Well, we're talking about the same team, actually. Torpedo is just the first. It's just the name of the team. Nizhny Novgorod is a city.
It's a city.
That's what I was.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's.
So we're both right. Good. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so he's
plays for Igor Larionov, which is significant.
So he's still a kid, right? He's 20 years old, but it's pretty amazing that this kid is averaging 22 minutes 48. He's 5th in the KHL in time on ice per game. And he's 20 years old in the KHL, which is not exactly known to be a league that that leaves a lot of ice or leaves a lot of leeway to younger players. Mm-hmm. Offensively, he had started off really well. Yeah, he picked up 9 points in his first 14 games. That was absolutely insane. Since then, 8 points in his next 20 games, but he's still, and it fit also with he played a little bit less during that time, but he's still a guy who plays on both special teams. And I was told that he was expected to become captain of his team next season. So this is how much Igor Larionov believes in this kid. Even though he's 5'11", so he's not exactly a big defenseman, there's a lot to like.
Less than 180 pounds, yeah.
Yeah. So
it's funny when you look at the KHL defense scoring standings, he is just ahead of Darren Dietz, former Canadiens draft pick, who has had a hell of a career in Russia. Honestly, has really been there for a long time and has put together an excellent career in Russia. Sorry for that aside, but I was just kind of looking at his name.
He was named KHL's best defenseman probably on more than one occasion.
Yeah, no, he's put together quite a hockey career over there. and it's quite good for you, Darren Dietz.
So Konyushkov, I don't think there's no expectation at all that he's going to be in Montreal anytime soon.
No.
His contract runs until the end of the 25-26 season. But
Mm.
honestly, he can stay there, dominate, and that's fine. But it's not because the Canadiens did not draft Matvei Mishkov. Obviously, that they're allergic to all Russian players, and Konyushkov's the one example, and that goalie Volokhin is another.
Well, I mean, it's there's a difference between picking a guy fifth overall and picking a guy in the fourth round and the fifth round. I mean, those are two different things. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but yeah, the Vulcan thing is, I know, you know, Jacob Fowler is obviously the sort of the crown jewel of the Canadiens goaltending crop, but this is a goaltender that's making really big strides in Russia. There was some chatter, and I don't know if this is still a possibility, but I had heard a lot of chatter actually early on in the season that Volokhin was so impressive that SKA St. Petersburg was looking to sign him to a 3-year deal, which would have
Mm.
been both good and bad for the Canadiens in the sense that it's good because that's how good the goalie is, and that if SKA wants to make that kind of commitment to him, but obviously would mean that the Canadiens have to wait until that contract expired before they could hope to have him in Montreal. But his numbers in the junior league in Russia have been phenomenal. There is a lot of excitement in the Canadiens organization over how he's playing. And I think there's just a general level of excitement over how the goaltenders that they drafted in this last draft are playing. I mean, I think Fowler's been very impressive at Boston College, but this Volokhin kid is someone that probably didn't have the same level of expectations as Jacob Fowler did, but is easily exceeding what the organization thought he would do this season. Now it just remains to be seen what his KHL future would be if the Canadiens can swoop in and get him over to North America before he signs a KHL contract and gets locked in to being in Russia for longer than the Canadiens would like. But there's definitely a lot of excitement in the organization around this kid, and they think they might have found something quite special in the fifth round.
But isn't it better to leave goaltenders, if they can be, because of the KHL, if the KHL hold them a few years longer, isn't it better in
Yeah.
terms of development
Well, I don't
rather
know
than
about better.
spreading?
It's not disastrous. I don't know about better, but it's not a disaster. I mean, if he were to sign for 3 years and were to come to North America immediately as soon as that contract expired, then yeah, no problem. If you could have some assurance that he would do that, then
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no problem. But if he signs for 3 years and decides, you know what, I have a pretty good life here, I'm getting paid pretty well, I play on a really good team, I'm going to sign another deal, another deal, and then never come, that's the problem. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. It is better if you were to sign for 3 years, stay for only 3 years, and then come. But if you sign for 3 years, let's say Scott wins like 2 KHL championships in those 3 years, and he's the star of it, and he decides, I don't need anything else in my life other than this. This is great. Then that becomes a problem. So, but the fact that we're even having this conversation is a great problem for the Canadiens to have. It's a problem that they frankly did not anticipate having. So it is a good situation for them in terms of filling what is their biggest hole in the organization, pipeline wise,
Mm-hmm.
which is the goaltending position. So,
One of the best goalies out of Russia in the last draft was named Yegor Zavragin. You still name Yegor Zavragin. And he was picked in the third round by the Philadelphia Flyers. And he plays on the same team as Volokhin. And those two kids were sort of in a competition. They followed each
mm-hmm,
other's tracks for a long time. And Zavragin has always been considered like the better of the two, like the guy who was one step ahead. And Zavragin played 4 games in the VHL, and whereas Volokhin has stayed so far only in the MHL. So I don't
mm-hmm.
know if those 4 games changed something in just of how the workload has been split. But so far, Volokhin has played 15 games for their team, and now I have to make sure that I don't mix up the name of the team and the the
You
name of
didn't
the
mix
team
it up last time.
and
It was just
yeah, but
we had two different reference points on the last one. Yeah.
yeah, that's it. So anyway, Mamonti Ugri, that's the name of that team. Um, so you've got Volokhin who played 15 games, and Zavargin has played only 9. So I don't know if the Canadiens prospect has stolen the number one job, but there's clearly a much
Mm-hmm.
stiffer competition between those two, and Volokhin really holding his own in a way that probably was not expected before the season. So it's when you talk about the Montreal Canadiens brass being excited with the positive development of that goalie, who's a big goalie. He's over 6'3". He's borderline 6'4". Well, that's one of the reasons, because the recent progress that they've seen in that kid is extremely encouraging. So
Yeah.
that's it.
I think that applies to both those guys. Those were both seen as shots in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think shots in the dark is not fair. They were not in the dark. They knew about these players. They decided to use those picks for a reason. But right around the same range as Florian Jacki was picked, and I think the Canadiens are pretty excited about Florian Jacki too, even though everyone kind of doubted their wisdom in doing that. So, but anyhow, these two Russian players are not maybe the Russian player that everyone wanted the Canadiens to draft, but the two that they did draft, they are quite excited about.
Yeah. All right, so that will wrap it up for this Friday edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Don't forget that you can rate our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to us, and also you can subscribe to the SDPN channel on YouTube. And we'll be back on Monday for more game analysis with also your mailbag. So don't hesitate to send us your questions either on Twitter at Basu and Godin or on our email address at basuandgodin@gmail.com. So that's it. All right, everybody.
Have a good weekend, everyone.